Hi all, coming to you this morning from a very, very frosty, very cold Coire Sois garden. And despite the freezing cold and the frost on the ground, it is absolutely beautiful. And the birds are singing and there is beautiful, beautiful sunrise. But yeah, today I kind of wanted to talk about stuff that's been on my mind, and I suppose it's about the shadow in ourselves and how that then collectively applies into society. And so into that comes racism, xenophobia, misogyny, and the rise of the far right, and how we as a spiritual community, as people on a spiritual path, need to look at that and the kind of stand we need to take, because I do really believe we need to take one. Obviously, politically, I am an eco-socialist, so I believe in the sovereignty of the land. I believe in protecting our environment. I believe in standing for this land and all of the people on it, and I mean all of the people. And it's been really disturbing to see what's been going on in some of the areas of Dublin and other places around the country, with people basically gathering outside buildings where there are vulnerable people inside, where there are children, where there are people fleeing war, where, there are women, including a heavily pregnant woman in one situation, with baying mobs outside shouting, get them out, go back home. And, as people in this pagan or spiritual community, and I'm talking from the point of view here of Coire Sois being a school that trains people in the ways of our ancestors, trains people in understanding our mythology, knowing our mythology, connecting with the sacred power in this land, honouring all living beings. And I go, how can anyone who walks this path or professes to walk this path be part of that or support that? So it's really important to be clear about the difference between actual fascism, actual racism, and desperate, struggling, disillusioned, frustrated people rightly identifying the fact that our government has literally done nothing, I mean nothing, to deal with the housing crisis. And it is really wrong. It is really wrong that we have people sleeping on the streets. And that's really wrong, whether they are Irish people, Irish born, whether they are immigrants who have come from elsewhere, whether they are refugees. That's where the anger should be targeted at government. And I think, within the spiritual communities, within the pagan community, there can be that kind of, oh, we're not political thing. Well, you mightn't be party political, but you really can't exist in life without being political. The minute you object to something, for instance, the plan to sell off a big tract of quilter forestry to a investment fund. In other words, essentially a vulture fund doing to rural Ireland what it has done to the housing market in the cities. You know, if we object to that, we're being political. You can't say otherwise. The minute you say we want the government to tackle the housing crisis, you're being political. So to me, I don't separate myself as a person into the spiritual and the political, into the activist, into the priestess. I am one being, and all of me cares about all of those things. And if we truly believe in sovereignty, we have to understand what that means. It is actually standing in our authentic selves. It is standing in our own power. But standing in our own power is about power in balance. And for power to be in balance, we have to embrace our own shadow. We never come to that point of authenticity without understanding our own darkness, without actually naming it, acknowledging it, facing it, and then we integrate it into our full being so that we can stand in the core of our authentic selves. Now, the same thing goes for collective shadow. And I think what we're seeing at the moment, with these anti-refugee and anti-asylum seeker and anti-immigrant protests, which, make no mistake, are actually driven by the far right. And when I say the far right, I'm not talking about people in a local community who might go, oh, look at this is ridiculous. Like, people coming from other places are being put up in a hotel or an empty convent or a disused building, and Irish people are on the streets. There's an understandable level of frustration with that, but it's a misplaced target, because the target has to be the people who are at the root of that, and the people who are at the root of that are successive governments. So let's come back to the shadow. What we're seeing, is really the face of evil, because those who actually are, members of far right groups, people from the Freedom Party, the National Party, Identity Ireland, people who affiliate with those groups or former members of those groups who were even thrown out for being, too extreme, that is the face of evil, because to incite other people to hatred, to whip up fear and hate so that people will attack another group of human beings, verbally or physically, is to me evil, and absolutely the depths of the shadow, the collective shadow in society. And so, if we don't take a stand on this, if we don't acknowledge it, just like in the personal shadow, if we don't call it what it is, if we don't name it, we have no hope of actually healing it. So, in terms of our Irish path, in terms of the way of the ancestors, in terms of our ancient gods and goddesses, I think of the Tuatha De Danann. They're like clearly immigrants. They arrived in these strange boats, and we revere them. We revere Eru, who gave her name to the land. We revere Danu, Lu, who kind of inspires to honourable action. That's who we need to be looking to right now. Lu, God of light, inspirer to honourable action, because standing screaming at vulnerable people, get out, get them out, is anything but honourable. It is the height of dishonour. And the ancient warriors weren't just about battle, they were about standing in defense also. And we need to stand up and stand in defense and be clear that we stand for all people. So when you share posts about our own or look after our own, when you share posts from these, says no groups that are attacking immigrants, you are not standing in honor. You're not standing as an honorable warrior. You are actually feeding the forces of the shadow. And so, what we have to do is expose the shadow. What we have to do is call it by its name. What we have to do is acknowledge what it is. And what we have to do is then begin to try the process of healing. And there are some who are not amenable to that, who won't come into the wholeness of society. And yes, of course, all humanity is one, which means that in that oneness is included the racist, the homophobes, the transphobes, the xenophobes. That doesn't mean that we can ignore it. It certainly doesn't mean that we can support it, because that makes us part of it. So if we really care, about humanity, if we really care about the homeless on the streets, if we care about, those on hospital trolleys, if we care about our traveller community, if we care about the vulnerable, then what we do is we take a stand. We take a stand for human compassion. We take a stand for love. And if that means we are against the opposite, then so be it. So be it. And I know that, a lot of people will talk about, there's a new way. It's not about left or right. It's not about, us and them. But we're all us. And some of the people in the us are like a cancer in the whole body that is the us, that is humanity. And so we don't feed that. We find ways to heal it or to remove it. And I have to sort of bring into that misogyny, because this is all part of the same movement. And if you really analyze it, if you take the trouble to search the people who put up these things, go in, look at their profiles, look at where they come from, look at who they're sharing, then look at them, and so on and so on. And you can go down the rabbit hole a little bit, of course, and we need to protect our own mental health and our own boundaries. But what you will see is that the funding, the language even that's used, the support for this kind of movement in Ireland is coming fairly and squarely from the far right and the fundamentalists in America. So when you see people kind of making apology, I don't know if that's the right word, kind of watering down what some of these people are saying, or like they're not so bad because they said this as well and blah, blah, blah. It's very slick. It's very consciously done. They're very savvy with social media, and there's a lot of funding there. And so, like the evangelical fundamentalist Christians in the States are basically inspiring, supporting, and funding far right here, who, for the most part, are ultra Catholics. What does that mean for us as women, as LGBT community, as non-nationals? as pagans. Make no mistake, if the far right were to actually get a hold in terms of power in Ireland, and I mean, I don't see that as an immediate threat, but if they were, women's rights would be gone. We'd be back to the 1950s. And I'm saying this as someone who was a mother in a mother and baby home. LGBT rights would be gone. Women's bodily autonomy would be gone. Travellers who are getting a rough ride for many's the year now would also be in a much worse position. Do you want to see the rise of racism? Do you want to see the rise of misogyny? Do you want to see the erosion of all kinds of rights that we have achieved as we've emancipated a little bit from the grip of the Catholic Church? I certainly don't. And I will say this, the ethos in Coire Sois is inclusive. And there is no room for any kind of xenophobia, any kind of racism, any kind of prejudice, transphobia, homophobia, misogyny in this school. So if you're interested in what I do, but you fall into one of those categories, you'll probably unfollow me now. I know the last time I put up a similar post, I lost some followers. And, you know, good luck to you, because that's not what I'm about. That's not what this school is about. This is about really honouring this land, really honouring the legacy of our ancestors, really honouring our ancient gods and goddesses. And they were immigrants. Our forerunners, the forerunners of the Irish, the Gael, the Milesians, they were immigrants. And if we go back to our hunter-gatherer ancestors, those people who inhabited the burn, and we saw it in Burn Heart of Stone in the documentary, forensic archaeology, DNA has proven that they were black-skinned with blue eyes. So let's not have any more nonsense about, you know, Ireland was always white. No, it wasn't. And before our actual direct ancestors came here, it was not. So we need to kind of really understand these things. We need to think about them, and we need to walk our spiritual path as warriors of the light, warriors of love. And those two things are not mutually exclusive. I have huge devotion to Maureen, the Morrigan. She was our battle goddess, goddess of death. And I see her as not just about battle, but really about clarity, strategy, focus. And Bridget also knew how to claim just what she needed, not with greed, just what she needed. So this is a bit of a ramble now at this stage, but I really needed to talk about this. And when it comes to misogyny, you know, we have all that Andrew Tate stuff that's come up recently. And there are people who haven't quite kind of seen what he is really about, because, like everybody on the right, he will make conflicting statements. But there isn't any doubt that that man is a rapist. There isn't any doubt, from his own words now I'm talking about, there isn't any doubt that that man is an exploiter of, trafficker of women. Now, are you okay with that? I'm certainly not. So, all this gobbledygook about escaping the Matrix and all this stuff, leave that to one side. This is a man who has raped women. This is a man who has trafficked women. This is a man who, by his own words, has said he'll meet a woman He'll have a few dates. He'll make her, how I don't know, but he'll make her fall in love with him. And when he knows she's at the point that she'll do whatever he wants, then he brings her back and gets out the webcam and he'll make a load of money. Now, he said that himself. So I don't understand how any person with a sense of equality, any person with a heart, certainly any woman, can support him. We need to stamp out misogyny. We need to stamp out racism. We need to stamp out xenophobia. We need to stamp out all kinds of bigotry and prejudice. And I will stand up and be counted and take my part in that, even if it's just by making little videos like this, sharing what I think, But just be very wary who you associate with and who you're standing with. You might be in your community really concerned about local people in your community. You might be believing the lies because the far right peddles so many lies. Don't be taken in. Don't be taken in. Direct your righteous anger towards the government. And let's draw our sustenance from those ancestors, our immigrant ancestors, waves of immigrants who came to this land. So as we approach Bridget's Day, Bridget, the immigrant who came on the boat with the Tuatha, let us draw from this sacred land that love and compassion that will help us to stand in balanced power. Power does not come from screaming at other people. Power does not come, from prejudice. Power does not come from focusing on the wrong target. Power comes from that balance where we can stand in our center and not be manipulated, controlled, disempowered by others. Nor, and this is crucial, do we seek control over others. We seek to stand in our own centered power, and that's enough. So I wish you blessings of Bridget on this day, blessings of the Morrigan for strength, for focus, for clarity, and for success in any battle or challenge within your life. I ask you to really consider this and stand in the place of love. Sometimes standing in the place of love will make us the enemy of those who don't want that love to spread. So let's not let them win. Gra agus banach the accordia. Slán go fóill.